He's retired from the NYPD. When he retired, he was a commanding officer of the Homicide Division in the Bronx when a troubling incident occurred where 6 NYPD police officers were shot. The investigation, the pressure from the command staff, all led to his retirement. He's here to tell us all about it on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Do you want to be a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast? It's really quite simple. And before you get into this notion that I'm not a cop, I wasn't a cop, I don't have something to contribute. Well, the show is about investigating crime. That's one aspect of it from the real life perspective of those who did it. And then it's also about trauma, how trauma impacted them, often crime-based, but not always. Our guests quite often are law enforcement officers, other first responders, military, victims of crime, their spouses or survivors, talking about how trauma impacted them, what happened, how it affected their lives, and how they rebuilt their lives after. If you want to be a guest, just contact me. It's really simple. Send an email to jay@letradio.com. That's jay@letradio.com. Or go to letradio.com and the Contact Us page, and you can get me right there as well. Contact us from the great state of Florida. We have retired NYPD officer Vernon Geberth. By the way, we're the officer. That applies to all of us. He's commanding officer of the Homicide Division in the Bronx. And he's also author of several books. One that a lot of people would know is Practical Homicide. His website is practicalhomicide.com. Vernon, before I get into it, and I forget, thank you for your service, number one. Number two, thanks for being a guest on the show. Both very much appreciated.
Oh, thank you.
How long did you do in the NYPD?
23 years, almost.
For those who don't know. I got hurt and retired young. I was 33. I've had multiple surgeries, and I thought I sprained my wrist, and it was a line of duty, horrible act of violence. But when you have your time on and you can retire at any time, it's kind of freeing. Before then, you are at the whim of sergeants, lieutenants, all kinds of command staff, city hall, you name it. Was that the situation with you?
Yes, 20 years and out if you wanted to get out. But if you love the job the way I did, I would have stayed much beyond 20 years. Because I love working homicide.
I loved the job, too, and I would have stayed longer. I initially, Vernon, thought I'd do about 25 years, get promoted. I retired to the rank of sergeant, and it just wasn't in the cards for me. But we'll talk about that later. During your career, you started as a police officer like everybody does. You go through the academy, and eventually you started to migrate towards investigating homicides, didn't you?
Well, I had to go through other things, just like you know. When I was very fortunate, when I graduated from the academy, they put me right into the tactical patrol force, which was kind of like the Green Berets of the police department. We weren't involved in precinct-level actions like DOAs, traffic control, aided cases. We were strictly crime fighters. And the beauty of that is that I didn't know anybody in New York City, but being a TPF cop, within 3.5 years, I was going into the detective bureau.
Right.
So that was a bonus.
Kind of sounds like what I did was I went to patrol first, then I went to operations. And operations, you didn't handle calls, you just handled crime.
Right. That's what we did. Non-stop 24/7, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. And towards the end of that, they picked the people who were most active, and they put us in something called the Manhattan North Nighttime Task Force, which was a fancy word for anti-crime. Mm-hmm. And from there, we proved that we were able, within 30 days, me and my partner made 20 felony arrests for guns and robberies, and we were introduced to the Bureau. Of course, now being in the Detective Bureau, you're brand new. And it was kind of funny because I went into the Bureau with 5 people, me and my dopey partner and 3 people who were hooked up. who ended up in special assignments. We got stuck on a real assignment because we were new. Well, it was such a terrible detail. Anyway, finally got into narcotics where I excelled, and from narcotics I went to a squad. Then I went to a citywide anti-crime unit, and right after that I got into robbery, and I was promoted to sergeant.
Gotcha. How hard was it to make it rank as sergeant? And why back in those days, it was, by the way, the incident we're going to talk about happened in 1986. So you were on the job from the late 60s up to the mid-80s, correct?
I came in 65.
Gotcha. So you're a real old-timer.
And I certainly am, and that's why I talk the way I do.
Look, there's nothing wrong with that. I tell people all the time, I'm a Neanderthal, knuckle-dragging cretin of a cop. If you looked up a cop in the dictionary with a photo, it should show me. I would never, ever, I was lousy undercover. I didn't do well with that at all. But the other stuff, other narcotics work, I excelled at.
Well, you look like a cop, probably.
I do. And I walk like one, I talk like one, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but you can't be undercover if you look like a cop.
No, forget about it. I'll give you a little secret. You probably did this too, some of you guys. I used to wear a medic alert bracelet. Remember those back in the day?
Yeah.
And I would say I was diabetic or I had epilepsy or whatever it might be, and I would use that as my cover so I wouldn't have to consume drugs. It never worked.
Well, listen, these people are streetwise, okay, and they're survivors of narcotics. I'll tell you one thing about it. Before you get to homicide, you should spend time in narcotics because that's an education.
It is.
You get to see the worst of the worst, and everybody's lying and trying to figure out the truth. So by the time you come into homicide, you've got a pretty good handle for talking to people.
And here's the thing that a lot of people don't get. And I just had a conversation with a guy who's a radio host in Long Island. And one of the things is that, for example, working informants in narcotics, you never trusted them because they were always had an angle. We used to strip them before we did a buy, and you always learned how to work an informant.
Absolutely. Informants can be your undoing because they're out there trying to get by. They're informing to not go to jail, but at the same time, they're still involved in illegal activity.
Right.
And you don't want them to pull you in.
No, and you don't want to be disgraced because of something else. And here's another thing that, look, I don't care personally if someone wants to be an informant, and I don't care if they have charges on them. It was whatever motivation for doing it. But one of the things I take extreme exception to, Vernon, I would love to know your input on this, is Whitey Bulger is the example I'm going to use from Boston area. Irish mob, all that stuff. He always said, I never ratted anybody. He was an paid informant for the FBI and Boston police. He was an informant all along.
So are some of these radical reverends, and we're not going to mention any names, who were working for the FBI, and they never said they informed. So we know that.
Yeah. So you had to go through the whole gamut you made sergeant. And the original question was, how tough was it back in the day to make rank, to make sergeant?
Well, I was a college graduate at the time, so for me the written test was a joke. That's what they did. When it was strictly civil service, people who promoted because they passed the test, then they realized they weren't getting the right numbers and the right flavors.
Right.
And that's when they came up with and they organized civil service, and they came up with a gimmick so they could get people in.
Right.
But I had no problem getting promoted. The problem was when it was time for me to get promoted to sergeant, I had a CCRB, a Civilian Complaint Review Board charge, and they held me up. They held my promotion for 6 months.
I had many what we called IID complaints. They're all not sustained. They're all unfounded, but didn't matter. If you were active and you were aggressive and you wound up locking up drug dealers, they made complaints against you. That's the first thing the lawyers told them to do.
Absolutely. It's part of this part. But the problem is today, it's a whole different look. If you have more than 3, you're considered violence prone.
Right.
We're cutting our legs off. We're cutting the legs of the police off. It's terrible.
Well, what we want to be doing is, and I don't mean this as a negative, but we have 2 types. We have cops and we have mobile report takers. And those mobile report takers usually get promoted because they never get in trouble. And they're the last ones to any call. They never get blood on their uniforms. And there's danger for both of them, but those are the ones that make rank, and those are the ones that pass judgment on the street cops who are trying their best to do the job.
Exactly. So what makes them different than the Pharisees at the time of Jesus?
Look, you and I could discuss that all day long. We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Vernon Geberth. Vernon is retired from NYPD. He was the commanding officer of the Homicide Division in the Bronx when a particularly tragic situation occurred that ended his career. He's written several books, but number one is Practical Homicide. A lot of people know that. His website is practicalhomicide.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Here's your chance to get into the ground floor, to make a donation to make the movie Gun Runner, based off of the true story of now retired police detective Maria Oliveira, who shot 6 times while investigating a crime, died 3 times, brought back to life, was in a hospital for a month, rushed back to work, only to suffer a near-fatal heart attack, and then several months later, a near-fatal stroke. It talks about his recovery, his life after, and more. That's at gunrunnerfilm.com. Again, you can make a donation at gunrunnerfilm.com. Reconnecting with Vernon Geberth. Vernon is a retired NYPD officer. He's commanding officer of the Homicide Division in the Bronx. And this is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. He's written several books. One is called Practical Homicide. His website is practicalhomicide.com. He's known as the godfather of homicide. And be sure to check his website, practicalhomicide.com. He started the job in 1965. So he's seen lots of... You started back in the day where they didn't even issue vests, didn't you?
I never had a vest. Yeah.
When I was a rookie cop and summer before the academy ended, they gave us mace, which we were instructed by the old-timer police. Never use that stuff because it only works on innocent bystanders and police. Never works on a bad guy. We were given a vest and we were given a .38 revolver and a little tiny nightstick, which we all traded in for a table leg.
Well, we had blackjacks, we had Coca-Cola nightsticks. We didn't have vests. They didn't give us mace. They didn't trust us with mace. Basically, and no radios. So you were out there. You're on your own.
Yeah. I jokingly tell people that the day I graduated from the academy and I showed up in the Northwest District of Baltimore, I was working 622 car, which really is not significant, but I was given a map, a handout of a map of my post, and a battery, and told to relieve the guy in this car. And I was, and the very first call for service I got, I never found it. I never made it to it. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have none of that stuff.
GPS? No, of course not.
And I was broken in and trained by a lot of Vietnam combat veterans. And we had a couple Korean War veterans or command staff, and they were excellent police. I mean, they were really top-notch.
Well, in order to be the action police, you got to be tough. You got to be able to control the street, and you got to be able to command respect. And today, I mean, if anybody dumped a pail of water on me, they'd be going to the hospital with a turban.
I know. Don't even get me started about that. Look, and people are going to take exception to this. If you assaulted me, I learned this early on. If you assaulted me or another officer, we did our level best to make sure you made it to the hospital before you made it to the booking, because there's no guarantee what's going to happen in court, but you're going to learn a lesson. You'll never do that again.
No, you don't put your hand on a cop.
No.
That's
I don't put my hands on you. I don't disrespect you. I don't call people names, and you're not going to tolerate being done to me either. So let's talk about you being commander of the Homicide Division. You what rank were you when you assumed that position?
I was a lieutenant commander.
Okay. So it took a little while to get from there.
As a lieutenant commander, you get a borough, which is a county-wide assignment, which in my case was Bronx homicide. And at the time, we were doing between 400 and 500 homicides a year. It was the years of the crack cocaine epidemic,
right,
and people were dropping like flies. It was nonstop, 24/7 murder and mayhem. And I used to get a kick out of the news media because every once in a while somebody from the news media, which is based in Manhattan, would call, any good cases in the Bronx? What's a good homicide? I don't know what a good homicide is.
They were all bad.
It was... they were all bad, but they were looking for a sexy case, like the media likes, things they can dress up.
We had a saying, Vernon, that if, in Baltimore, I'm sure it's probably the same in New York, if it bleeds, it leads, especially with the print media.
Oh, yeah. But it couldn't be the local denizens of the community. It had to be somebody from the outside that they could dress up. No, it was pretty scary. It was pretty bad. But the case that was the exit for me was a quadruple homicide that took place on October 30th, 1986, within the confines of the 41st Precinct, which people know as Fort Apache.
Right.
And we responded. It's quadruple is a big deal, no matter, even though they're nobody to anybody else, but to us, they're four human beings. Turned out these four Puerto Rican drug dealers were executed, shot in the back of the head. Money and crack were taken from the location, and it was pretty hectic. We processed the crime scene to the best of our ability, and we ended up gathering ballistics, and there was a cash box that we treated for fingerprints, and we came up with a print. In the meantime, our detectives were very busy with our informants. We came up with a name. And when we came up with that name, son of a gun, if the print didn't match this guy, he was a known drug person. He was a crackhead, but he was also robbing crackheads. Had an extensive record. So at this point, we have a known fugitive. And I asked my chief. My chief was a real character. He was a patrol-oriented individual, hated detectives. In fact, when he first came into the Bronx, he called all the commanders in, and he made an announcement. You know, I never liked you guys, and now I'm in charge.
Yeah.
and then he says, and you, Geberth, you think you're smart because you wrote a book. I'm running this place. So I said, oh, I'm under the gun now. Anyway, I said to him, Chief, let me, now that we know who it is, let me put him to my fugitive squad. We don't need no elitists, so local precinct detectives can handle this. Now, I'm going to tell you, the reason we have a fugitive squad is so people don't get hurt. Mm-hmm. Our fugitive squad does in-depth analysis. They know who the guy's girlfriend is, who his wife, where he lives, his parents. They know his habits, and they know when to grab him. Instead, every time this character was located, they put together a group of people trying to catch him, and they kept missing him. And on November 19th, 1986, information came in that he was hiding at one of his sister's houses on Fulton Avenue in the Bronx. They tried to put together an apprehension with 27 police from emergency services unit from different precincts. They went to that neighborhood, and detectives attempted to enter the apartment. The suspect, with his nieces and nephews in front of him, opened fire, and 6 cops were shot. We never had 6 cops shot. And by the grace of God, there was a hospital across the street. Now, listen, you're from Baltimore, from the Bronx. There are certain hospitals we don't go to, right?
Right. Exactly. Whatever you do,
one of them. This is the kind of hospital. Yeah, and if your partner brings you kill them when you get out.
That's right.
But they were lucky enough to stabilize our offices. The chief surgeon responded and brought these guys to Bellevue the next day. But in the meantime, all broke loose, and there's mass pandemonium. I get a call at home, and I'll tell you, when I got that call, I thought one of my detectives, Tom, was going to die. That's how bad it was. I raced in, and I know from past experience not to go to the scene. That's where everything's out of control. I went to my command. I put together an extraction team. Extraction teams are people that go out and we yank people out of their crib and find out what we need to find out. We had information that our suspect was holed up at a certain location. We're about to go out into the street when in rolls my chief. No detectives in the street. My orders are the police commissioner. We don't want a racial incident. I said, a racial incident? We have
Let's take a break on that note and return that in this moment. We're talking with Vernon Geberth, the retired NYPD commanding officer of the Homicide Division in the Bronx. He's also author of multiple books. Practical Homicide is the one he's most known for. His website is practicalhomicide.com. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. And this is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Imagine earning an extra $500 to $5,000 a month or more from the comfort of your home or business, all with Facebook. That's right. Meta is paying people just like you every month. Learn how to create another revenue stream from Meta and dramatically increase your reach, all without breaking your own time bank. Sign up for a free membership at letbreak.com. letbreak.com. That's letbreak.com.
Be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free and be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Return conversation with Vernon Geberth on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Vernon is retired from the NYPD. He was commanding officer of the Homicide Division in the Bronx when 6 police officers were shot. We're talking about that. He's also author of multiple books. One that he's most well known for is called Practical Homicide. He's also known as the Godfather of Homicide. His website is practicalhomicide.com. Vernon, before we went to break, you started talking about orders from the police commissioner about detectives on the street. And I got to say this. The best commissioner I worked for was a gentleman named Bishop Robinson. We had, I think, 5 in my career. And the truth is, we would get someone shouting stuff like that by orders of the police commissioner, and no one cared because they were here today, gone tomorrow. And if you played by the rules, there's nothing they could do to you. It doesn't mean it could make your life miserable. It could be bad detail. But you were on the street, and they said no detectives by order of the police commissioner because they didn't like how it looked, right?
Well, the truth of the matter is the same police commissioner that ordered us not to be in the street was the same commissioner who released the suspects in the Harlem mosque shooting in 1972, released the suspects to the crowd. But my chief tells me, and I'm here to babysit you, Geberth. No problem. I'm here. He went home at 5:30. At 5:35, me and 12 of my hand-picked people were in the street. We missed the suspect by an hour. The next day, all breaks loose. The chief of the department orders Alpha Bravo tours, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. No detectives in the street. We want you to detect. What the is that? Detect. Well, that basically boils down to getting informants, getting information, but you can't leave. Now, they put together this master plan, and you got to hear about this master plan because this drove me completely nuts. The master plan was as follows. We're the only police department in the world to have the rank of super chief. We had 5 super chiefs. So each of the super chiefs had a code name. The chief was Patton. The next chief was Custer. The next chief was Halsey. The next chief was Minutes. Can you believe this? And they had army helmets. And they were going to lead a convoy which consisted of emergency service detectives and community representatives to make sure that this suspect wasn't hurt in the capture. Now, the game plan was as soon as detectives or some detectives detected where the suspect might be, they notified command and control and they dispatched the convoy. But the convoy could not move unless there was a super chief in front. So you picture this. You're from Baltimore, from the Bronx. There are certain neighborhoods you can't drive down the street in an unmarked Crown Vic without raising up the neighborhood, right? Right. They're coming in with a parade, and they can't figure out how the suspect's running out the back door. At one point, I said to my chief, please, chief, let me put my people on the perimeter. You're a fascist, Geberth. I said, I'm not a fascist. I'm giving you a game plan. This went on for 17 days. We were like the laughing stock of the Eastern Seaboard. At one point, after my 12-hour tour, I drove upstate to get my son from college, and when I got to the thruway, I saw a picture of on the thruway booth. So I said, this jerk wouldn't be smart enough to go to the thruway. He's holed up in some crib in the Bronx or in Manhattan. Now comes to our, this is terrible. We get the FBI. The FBI gets involved. The FBI has an informant that tells them that is hiding in Harlem. So, okay, so they don't talk to detectives. They talk to the high command because detectives will see right through it. In any event, they mobilize and hit this place, and the informant who walked in the front door with $5,000 walks out the back door with 5,000 taxpayer dollars. In the meantime, I get a call from my detectives. They have this suspect located in a premise in the Bronx, but there's nobody to respond because the convoy's in Manhattan.
The convoy.
At one point, the convoy.
I gotta say this. I can see it just like you're describing. And one of the things they always do, they do in Baltimore, is like, we have all these bosses involved, and everybody turn their sirens on. So you can hear them coming from a long ways away. And no one wants that going on in their neighborhood, and the bad guy knows you're coming.
And not only that, when the trucks stop, the air brakes go.
Yeah.
It just scared out everybody.
You know, one of the things we used to do, we used to raid the high-rise public housing. And quite often we'd use U-Haul trucks. We'd put about 30 police in the back, the big commercial rental trucks. Because there's just not enough room in the squad cars. And what do you get, 4 if you're lucky?
I wouldn't want to be the guy in the middle of the back seat.
No. So the thing that gets me, Vernon, is the super chiefs. As much as I hate to say this, and I don't want to be stereotypical, salty, old sergeant with command staff, but a lot of these command staff people are so concerned with optics because they want their photos on the news. They want to be on the print. They want to be on television. And they look how important I am. I've got 57 stars on my shirt.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we're the only department that has the rank of super chief. I don't think anybody else has that rank.
No, that's the first time I've ever heard that term. And I'm kind of laughing here. It's super chief. I could think of Super Chicken. Remember that song years ago? There's all kinds of things I can think of. But when these guys, and I'm not saying guys as in men and women, that applies to all genders.
No, in this case, they were all guys. Okay, this is 1986, and all the super chiefs were men. But the bottom line is the convoy could not move unless there was a super chief in the lead and with an army helmet. Okay.
And they're never going to catch the bad guys.
No, that's what happened. This is going on for 17 days. I got a call from a reporter who I knew, and basically, Vernon, what the hell is going on? I said, well, we should be striking like lightning. Instead, we move like a large elephant. Well, I didn't. My name wasn't on it, but they knew I said it. I got a call. Hey, you better watch your mouth. It's okay. So
well, they knew who it was.
Here's the bottom line.
Let me guess. Before we stop you, you were not a golden boy at this point.
Oh, no, of course not. Listen, as a commanding officer, my job was to protect my people and get the job done.
Right.
All right, that's the way I saw my position. And that's the way I always performed, from the time I ranked the rank of sergeant right up to detective sergeant, lieutenant, and commander.
No, I'm in total agreement with you. I had a reputation of being a cop's cop, but that didn't mean that as a supervisor we didn't demand the best. We did. But we also would be the source of, when the lieutenant wanted to yell at people, he yelled at me. I didn't yell at the troops. If someone was totally out of line, they got dealt with. But most of the time it was how it looked. It wasn't about real substance. On
December 5th, 1986, I committed commandicide. I was notified by one of my detectives that they had the suspect on the phone in an apartment, the same apartment that I tried to go to the night of the incident, November 19th. Now, the orders were, at this point, for me to notify command and control. I told the detective, do not notify anyone, you've notified me. The deputy inspector, who was detailed to make sure I didn't leave the office, got up and says, I'm out of here. He was a good guy. He was a former homicide commander. He was now a deputy inspector. I know what he was thinking. If you're going to commit suicide, I'm not going to watch.
That's right. I'm going to take a short break. We're talking with Vernon Geberth. He's retired NYPD. He was the commanding officer of the homicide division in the Bronx when 6 police were shot. He's talking about that. He's also author of multiple books. The one he's most known for is Practical Homicide. He's also known as the godfather of homicide, and his website is practicalhomicide.com. There's a couple ways you can stay in touch and keep informed of what's going on with the Law Enforcement Talk radio show. Number one, go to our website, letradio.com. Sign up for our email newsletter. It's real easy to find. I promise we don't spam you. I send out about one email every 2 weeks or so. And there's also a feature called Broadcast Channels on our Facebook page, where we send messages directly to your inbox, directly to your messenger. Real easy to sign up for. Make sure you like or follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. And up top, you'll see broadcast channels, one for free podcast versions of the radio show, another one, top post of the day. So you too can stay informed quickly, easily, and best of all, like always, free. Don't go anywhere. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.
Learn how you can be ultra successful on Facebook and possibly earn an income from Meta. Learn how to work smarter and not harder on Facebook. Get step-by-step instructions on what to do and what not to do. Start with a free membership. Get details at letbreak.com, letbreak.com. That's letbreak.com.
If you do any business on social media, Creating content is one thing. The trick is, how do you turn those people that contact you, that comment on your social media, into consumers? There's a great tool, and you can get more information at letpops.com. That's letpops.com. Best of all, you can start it for free. letpops.com. Check it out today. Return our conversation with Vernon Geberth on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Vernon's retired NYPD. He was a commanding officer of the Homicide Division in the Bronx when 6 police officers were shot, and he has written several books. One he's most known for is Practical Homicide, and the book is also known as The Godfather Homicide. His website is practicalhomicide.com. Before we went to break, Vernon, you talked about you committed commandicide. You did something you knew was going, and doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it was a wrong thing to do, but you did something that you knew was going to cause problems with the brass, didn't you?
I knew in my heart of hearts if I didn't do this, he'd never get caught. So I made a decision. I threw myself on the sword. I ordered 38 undercover officers into this housing project with the following orders. Nobody out, nobody in. They want to go out, they can't go out. They want to come in, they can't come in. When you have that lock, notify me. We're on portable radios. I put the convoy on alert that we had the suspect hold up, and they were going to be called. The message from my people that he was in the building, I ordered the convoy to come forward. It took him 15 minutes to go 5 blocks. Why? Because the super chief that day was Custer, and he was stuck in traffic in Manhattan, and they couldn't move without him. When the trucks pulled up in front of the housing project with the air brakes and the noise and the sirens, the whole world knew what was going down, including our suspect. But our suspect couldn't get out. The only way for him to go was up. Custer comes charging in with his army helmet, popping up and down, yelling and screaming, "By whose authority have you done this?" I said, "By the authority vested in your common sense." And then I slipped. I said, "You know something, Chief? That Beetle Bailey helmet makes you look like..." He turned around to see if I said anything. I ran in the building. It didn't take them long. Now we're downstairs in the command center. All the chiefs are there. The chief, Patton, the Custer, and they're all screaming at me. Now, later on, I bump into a housing lieutenant who says, "Vernon, it was the funniest thing I ever saw. They're all screaming and yelling at you, and you're smiling and saying, no, yes, yes." And so the chief, who was a very bureaucratic bully, very sarcastic, he would call his other chiefs and deputy inspectors, he would call them captain, their last civil service rank, which would traumatize them. And he says to me, "So, Vernon, are you a lieutenant commander, or a lieutenant?" I said, "I'm whatever the hell you want me to be, Chief. My men have been trapped in the building. They're not your men. They're my men." I said, "Okay, then your men have been trapped in the building."
Right.
Then the other guy jumps in. "Why did you do this?" Why? I said, "Because I wanted to get him caught." Then my guy says, "You know something? You were insubordinate." I says, "No, I improvised, adapted, and overcame. The suspect's in the building." The flogging stopped. The verbal flogging stopped when they found out he was in the building based on the wire. Now we're waiting. We finally get him on the 17th floor. He surrenders after house of negotiations. Okay, as he comes out of the building in handcuffs, my former detective, first grade, the police commissioner, the chief, walk him through a phalanx of police officers, look like something out of a bad B movie, and people yelling from the building, yeah, like he's a hero. He's a thug, a murderer,
right,
who attacked his own community, but he shot the cops. He's a hero. Some female reporter runs up to me and says, "Vernon, you call this raid?" I said, No, the generals did. Look, they're having a press conference. All the generals caught him. And the press conference goes, "We have captured so-and-so. There's no community unrest. The suspect was not harmed." Meanwhile, I still got cops in the hospital.
That's the part that makes no sense to me. I'm as someone who's not in law enforcement, I would say that makes no sense at all. As someone who's worked in law enforcement, it's understandable. It happens all the time.
Yeah, but that's the end of my career. Do you think I can remain?
No.
1 month later, the guy I called at becomes the chief of detectives. Is he going to allow me to remain as a lieutenant commander in charge of Bronx?
No. You put in your papers, you're retired.
Well, I have to, but they're very clever. They're kind of like the mafia. It won't be a frontal attack. they'll send up an inspection team. I'll be dying with 1,000 cups before I know what's happening.
Right.
So I had to slip out. I had to sneak out, basically, and I got assistance from civilian workers in the police department. They processed me out using my tax registry number. And when my papers were all ready to go, I was ready to go.
So you retired, and here's the thing that, and I'm not saying you did anything wrong. You've done a lot of things that I would have done as well. When we look at all this, and I'm not knocking the special units, the SWAT teams, the QRT, whatever terms you want to use, but we didn't have time for that stuff. We had to handle business, and sometimes it was not pretty. But you had a long, distinguished career. Did you feel that you were shoehorned or stuck in this thing where you did something wrong at the end?
No, I walked out with my head held high and my back straight. My actions were tactical and got him caught. But the reality of the situation is that you cannot go and stick the beast in the eye at the high command.
No.
Once you do that, you're a threat. It's what I often tell when I'm teaching people classes. I says, the problem in law enforcement is if you hang around too long, you get too smart. And what happens, you're smarter than the people who lead you.
Right.
And then when you criticize them, you become a threat.
We know that the higher rank they go, the more sensitive they are.
Yes.
You made the decision to retire, and when did you start writing books?
Well, that was the problem. I wrote the first book when I was still in service.
That's the death nail right there, Vernon. That's what puts you on the radar.
They actually put me under investigation for writing a textbook. I thought they'd be thrilled. I know the eunuch captain that was investigating me, he wanted to know by whose authority I wrote the book. I says, how about the First Amendment? He didn't think that was funny.
No.
So,
what was that first book that you wrote?
Practical Homicide Investigation, Tactics, Procedures, and Forensic Techniques.
And by the way, I don't know if any police that's been around a while that's not familiar with that book.
It's now in its 5th edition.
Yeah. There was basic things we learned from that book. And a lot of it was taught in service. By the way, I love when people say, you guys don't have enough training. We had 6 months in the academy. We had every year, we had a week of in-service training. And practical daily roll calls about patrol updates, about investigation updates, about law updates, and who's wanted. So about 2-3 times a week, we'd have those updates as well. So, yeah, we were trained.
Yeah, same here.
So this book got you in trouble with the brass, didn't it? Is that what started your downfall?
Well, actually, yeah, because when I got promoted to lieutenant, they sent me back to uniform to teach me humility. I was the top homicide detective sergeant in the Bronx. But I had to be taught humility. So, okay, I'll be a humble person. I was a lieutenant desk officer. When somebody realized, whoops, get him back.
One of the best things that happened to me was when I made rank, and just like you, they take you out of your present assignment and move you elsewhere. So I went from narcotics. I was detailed DEA, got promoted to sergeant, and I was put in uniform. And so I got my hair cut. I got everything there. And it was so freeing to be in uniform, to be in patrol. I didn't have all the pressures of being a detective anymore.
No, because when you're a detective, the case stays with you no matter where you are.
Right.
A patrol, it's like an 8-hour job. And one job to the next job, the job's over. In investigations, you're locked to that case.
So you wrote the book Practical Homicide. What was next?
Well, next I got promoted, and then I performed, and the case that I'm talking about was... it was so bad because I can't mention the name of the civil rights lawyer that came in, turned it into a corruption thing, and the Bronx jurors acquitted him of everything.
I saw that.
The only thing he was found guilty of was possession of a gun.
And then he got arrested for murder shortly after, or sometime after that, and then he was knifed to death in prison. So he got what he deserved.
Yeah, well, that's the best part of the story. And the newspaper called me up when he got stabbed in prison, and they asked me. I said, well, justice has finally prevailed. The prison system did what the criminal justice system could not do. Because
of all the uniforms. That's why all the super chiefs. We're going to wrap this up. Vernon, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. By the way, his website, get more details about him, his books at practicalhomicide.com. Vernon, thanks for your service, and thanks for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
One of the questions I get all the time, why are you always promoting the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page? Well, because there's no better place on Facebook. That's it. It's simple. Everything about the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast is right there, including great photos, stories you'll want to see, you'll want to share, memorials to law enforcement officers who were killed in the line of duty, all that and more. Plus, old episodes of the show can be found on our Facebook page. Just do a search for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show on Facebook and be sure to click like and or follow. We'll see you there. This was the podcast version of the nationally syndicated Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and we are so glad that you decided to join us. Big thanks to our guests for telling their story on the show. 2 simple things you can do. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. And be sure to follow us or like us on Facebook. Do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure when you see a post that we put up that you like, that you resonate with, that gets your attention, be sure to share it with your friends. We'll be back in just a few days with another great episode of the show. See you then.